Latrice Morris Dorsey had dated Earl Maxwell for about 4 years until right before she was murdered. Testimony today at Maxwell's preliminary hearing indicated they'd broken up and she was dating someone else, and clearly Maxwell was upset. Her estranged husband testified about a few phone calls with Maxwell.
What did he say the first time you spoke?
When I see your wife, I'm gonna kill her.
Latrice Morris Dorsey, a devoted and loving mother of 3, seemed to have a life centered around her children and her close-knit community. Known for her kindness and unwavering dedication to her family, she worked hard to provide a stable and nurturing environment for her kids. Her days were filled with the simple joys of motherhood, helping with homework, preparing meals, and making sure her children felt loved and secure. On the surface, it seemed like Latrice was managing to hold everything together. However, beneath this picture of normalcy lay a silent struggle. Latrice had recently ended her relationship with Earl Maxwell, a man who had become controlling and volatile over time. While the relationship had ended, Maxwell's inability to accept their separation cast a dark shadow over Latrice's life. Behind closed doors, she endured escalating threats and emotional turmoil as Maxwell's anger and jealousy grew more menacing. How far can unresolved emotions and control issues go when one partner refuses to let go, even after the relationship ends? What drives a person to take such extreme actions? And how can a seemingly normal life mask the darkest of secrets? Welcome to Crime-Berry Stories. Subscribe and hit the notification bell icon for more stories. This story takes us to Detroit, Michigan. On June 18, 2017, it was a warm summer evening in Detroit. A day filled with the promise of normalcy and the comforting routine of family life. But for Latrice Morris Dorsey, a devoted mother of 3, it would be her last. She didn't know it yet. None of them did. But the darkness that had been brewing in the form of relentless threats from a man she once trusted was about to explode into unimaginable tragedy. Latrice was the kind of woman who lived for her children. A hard-working mother who juggled the demands of parenthood with grace and strength, ensuring her kids, her world, had the best she could offer. But behind her resilient exterior, Latrice carried a burden that many women do in silence: fear. Fear of the man she once loved. Fear of what he might do after weeks of unrelenting threats, and fear for her family's safety. That fear became a horrifying reality in her own home, a place meant to be a sanctuary, when Earl Maxwell, her ex-boyfriend, stormed through her doors and unleashed violence that would forever scar her family. What happened to Latrice? Why did Earl Maxwell, a man she once shared her life with, feel entitled to take it all away? And how does a family heal after such an unspeakable act? Stay with me as we walk through this tragic tale of love, betrayal, fear, and resilience. Before that fateful day in June 2017, Latrice Morris Dorsey was much more than the tragic victim we now remember her as. She was a mother, a sister, a friend, and above all, a deeply compassionate soul whose world revolved around her 3 children. To know Latrice was to know love. Her life, though marked by challenges, was centered on ensuring her kids, her pride and joy, had everything they needed to thrive. Latrice was a dedicated mother to Justin, her eldest son, a young man she often referred to as her protector, her rock. He was the one she leaned on when times got tough, and she made it a point to remind him of his potential. Then there was her middle child, a bright and curious teenager, full of dreams and questions about the world. And finally, her youngest, a sweet, wide-eyed little girl who had her mother wrapped around her tiny finger. Latrice adored them all equally, and they were her reason to keep going, no matter how hard life got. Her life wasn't without its struggles, but she faced them with grace. Latrice worked tirelessly to make ends meet, juggling multiple responsibilities to create a stable life for her children. She was the kind of person who found joy in the simple thing. But behind that warm smile and unwavering kindness, Latrice carried a quiet burden. A burden that grew heavier with time. Her relationship with Earl Maxwell had started as many relationships do, full of promise and possibility. Earl was charming in the beginning. He knew how to make Latrice laugh and made her feel cared for in ways she hadn't experienced in a long time. At first, it seemed like he might be the kind of partner she needed, a man who would step in and not only love her but also love her children. But as the months turned into years, the cracks in his charming facade began to show. Earl became controlling, a little too possessive. He started questioning her every move, accusing her of things she hadn't done. At first, it was subtle, comments disguised as jokes, a sharp tone here and there. But over time, his anger became harder to ignore. And soon it wasn't just anger, it was manipulation, intimidation, and threats. Despite the growing tension in their relationship, Latrice tried to hold on to the good memories. She hoped Earl might change, that things could go back to how they were in the beginning. But deep down, she knew the man she had once trusted was no longer the man standing in front of her. He had become someone she feared. One particular chilling moment stands out, a time when Earl's anger boiled over during an argument. Latrice confided in a friend, saying, "He looked at me like I was nothing. He said, 'I'll ruin your life if you ever try to leave me.'" It was in that moment that she began to understand just how dangerous he could be. Earl's behavior became more erratic, his threats more explicit. According to her estranged husband, Paul Dorsey, Earl had even said, "When I see your wife, I'm going to kill her." Paul took those words seriously, but no one could have imagined how quickly Earl would act on them. Latrice did her best to shield her children from the turmoil. She never wanted them to see her pain or know the full extent of her fear. But even the strongest walls crack under pressure. Latrice Morris Dorsey was a woman who gave everything she had for the people she loved. A mother who worked tirelessly, a friend who always showed up, and a woman who deserved so much more than the hand she was dealt. Her life was one of love and sacrifice. As the months passed, the cracks in Earl Maxwell's behavior widened, and the warning signs grew harder to ignore. What had once been subtle control and manipulation turned into something darker, something far more dangerous. The man Latrice had once loved, the man who had promised to stand by her side, was becoming someone unrecognizable, someone full of rage, jealousy, and an overwhelming desire to dominate every aspect of her life. She would later confide in her closest friends, telling them that she felt trapped, suffocated by his presence. But by then, it was too late to undo the damage. Earl's controlling tendencies were first seen in the way he began dictating where Latrice could go, who she could speak to, and even how she should behave. It wasn't just about being protective, it was about ownership. He began showing up unannounced at her workplace, demanding to know who she had been speaking to, and accusing her of things she hadn't done. "I know what you're up to," he would tell her, his voice laced with suspicion. Latrice, caught in the middle, would brush it off, trying to downplay his behavior, but deep down, she felt the heavy weight of his growing possessiveness. "You think you can leave me?" Earl would snap in moments of anger, his voice cold and threatening. "You think you can get away from me? You can't escape. I'll make sure of it." These weren't just empty words. They were the first signs that Earl was ready to take control of Latrice's life in the most terrifying way. Every accusation, every warning, only served to make Latrice feel more isolated. The once loving man she had been with was becoming a monster. Latrice's friends, family, and even her children saw the shift. No one could ignore the constant tension that hung in the air when Earl was around. His eyes, cold and calculating, followed her every move. He wasn't just controlling, he was enraged by her desire for independence, her need to protect herself and her children from his grip. And then came the threats. Earl's words became more direct, more sinister. "When I see your wife, I'm going to kill her," Paul Dorsey, Latrice's estranged husband, would later reveal. Those words sent a chill down the spine of anyone who heard them. It wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. A promise that Latrice would never be free of him, that no one would protect her from his wrath. Paul took those words seriously, but Latrice, ever hopeful, believed Earl might never follow through. She believed, perhaps foolishly, that the man she once knew could change. She didn't know how wrong she was. Every time she tried to distance herself from Earl, every time she tried to stand up for her autonomy, his temper flared. The threats escalated, and so did the violence. Latrice knew the danger she was in, but she didn't know how to protect herself. In one conversation with a friend, she tearfully admitted, "He's been threatening me. I don't think he's going to stop. I'm scared for my life." Her friend urged her to take action, to seek help, but Latrice was hesitant. She had tried before. She had gone to the police, filed reports, but each time she was met with the same cycle, her fear mounting, her hope dwindling. Despite the mounting tension, Latrice did try to protect herself in what ways she could. She started keeping a journal, documenting Earl's threats, his behavior, and the constant strain he placed on her life. She took steps to make sure her children were never left alone with him, telling them to stay inside when he came by, pleading with them to ignore him when he knocked at the door. She even started carrying a phone with her at all times, just in case she needed to call for help. But with every passing day, she knew deep down that the walls were closing in on her. The sense of dread that had been building for months was becoming a suffocating reality. The situation continued to grow even worse. Earl was at her home one evening, and during a heated argument, his temper reached a boiling point. Latrice had made it clear that she wanted no more part of the relationship. It was over. She couldn't keep living like this, always walking on eggshells, always afraid of what might happen next. Earl snapped. "You think you can just walk away from me? I'll make sure you regret it. I'll make sure you never leave," he spat at her, the venom in his voice unmistakable. Earl's threats grew more frequent, more violent, and it was clear that Latrice was living in constant terror. The signs were all there, but no one could have known just how far Earl Maxwell would go to make sure Latrice couldn't escape his grasp. On Sunday, June 18, 2017, that tragic Father's Day, the unthinkable happened. Maxwell entered Latrice's home on Avon Avenue, his intentions dark and unwavering. In the living room, where laughter once echoed, he confronted Latrice. Her 4-year-old daughter was present, her innocent eyes witnessing a nightmare unfold. Maxwell drew a firearm, and in a horrific act of violence, shot Latrice multiple times. The sound of gunfire shattered the household's peace. In a nearby room, Latrice's 14-year-old son was engrossed in a video game, unaware of the horror transpiring just beyond his door. It wasn't until his young sister's frantic cries reached him that he realized something was terribly wrong. Rushing to the living room, he found his mother lying on the floor, life slipping away. Desperation took hold as he dialed 911, his hands trembling, voice shaking, pleading for help. He knelt beside his mother, attempting to stem the bleeding, his young mind grappling with the incomprehensible reality before him. Latrice, with her remaining strength, looked into her son's eyes, perhaps trying to convey love, apology, or reassurance. In those final moments, she took her last breaths in her son's arms, leaving him and his sister to face a world forever changed. The aftermath of that day left an indelible mark on the Morris Dorsey family. The children, once shielded by their mother's love, were now thrust into a harsh reality, their innocence shattered. The community mourned the loss of a devoted mother, while grappling with the senseless violence that had invaded their midst. Latrice's story serves as a poignant reminder of the devastating impact of domestic violence, urging us to remain vigilant and compassionate towards those who may be silently suffering. In the immediate aftermath of Latrice's brutal murder, the world around her family seemed to come crashing down. The loss of a mother, a sister, a daughter. It was a grief so intense, so raw, that it felt as though the very air in the home had been sucked out, leaving only a hollow space where joy once lived. The children, still reeling from the trauma of witnessing their mother's murder, were left without the one person who had given their lives meaning, stability, and warmth. Justin, the eldest son, was in a state of shock. He couldn't comprehend what had just unfolded before him. The memory of holding his mother in her final moments would haunt him forever. Karina, the youngest, was too young to understand the full extent of the tragedy, but the fear in her eyes spoke volumes. She clung to her older brother, seeking comfort in the only person left who could provide it, someone who was just as lost as she was. Paul Dorsey, Latrice's estranged husband, was devastated. His grief was layered with guilt, knowing that there had been so many warning signs that he couldn't ignore. He had heard the threats from Earl, the chilling words that made him fear for Latrice's safety, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality of what had happened. The phone call that came that day would be one he would never forget. The call that informed him that his children's mother was gone, taken in the most violent and heart-wrenching way. The community, too, was shaken. Latrice had been a well-known and well-liked figure in her neighborhood. She was the woman who helped others, the friend who would lend an ear, the mother who made sure her children had everything they needed. Her tragic death left a hole in the fabric of the neighborhood, a place that would never feel the same again. Her friends, her family, and even those who only knew her in passing, struggled to process the loss of such a vibrant life. As the days passed, the investigation began. The authorities, determined to bring Latrice's killer to justice, moved quickly. The evidence left behind at the crime scene told the story of the attack, of the rage and violence that had taken place within those walls. But what truly led the investigators to Earl Maxwell was his behavior in the aftermath of the murder. At first, Earl tried to distance himself from the crime, attempting to cover his tracks and make it appear as if he had nothing to do with the horrific events that had unfolded. But his lies and deceit didn't last long. Investigators quickly discovered that Earl had been the last person to see Latrice alive. His fingerprints were found at the scene, and the investigators soon uncovered his history of abuse and violent threats. It was clear Earl Maxwell was the perpetrator, and no amount of denial could change that fact. On June 20th, just 2 days after the murder, Earl Maxwell was arrested. He was taken into custody without incident, his face a mask of cold indifference. The charge was murder, first-degree murder, a crime so heinous that it left the courtroom in silence when the details began to surface. As Earl was led away, his family, who had once been loyal to him, was left in shock. They had never imagined that he was capable of such violence. Earl Maxwell had taken Latrice's life, and now he would have to answer for it. He didn't show signs of remorse. Instead, he spoke with a chilling lack of emotion, recounting the events of the day as though they were nothing more than a series of disconnected actions. "I did it," he said matter-of-factly when the police confronted him. "I don't know why. I just snapped." The confession was as cold and calculating as the murder itself. He claimed that he had acted out of rage, out of jealousy, out of a desire to maintain control over Latrice. But no words, no reasoning could ever explain the brutality of his actions. What had once been a relationship based on love had devolved into a nightmare that cost Latrice her life. The prosecution presented a detailed case against Earl Maxwell, outlining the abuse that had preceded the murder, the threats he had made, and the violence that had defined his relationship with Latrice. The defense, though attempting to argue that Earl had acted out of temporary insanity, couldn't undo the facts that were presented before the judge and jury. They couldn't undo the evidence of Earl's years of control, his abusive nature, and his ultimate decision to end Latrice's life in the most violent way possible. The moment of truth came on the day of the verdict. After deliberating for hours, the jury found Earl Maxwell guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom was filled with a sense of closure, but it was bittersweet. For Latrice's family, there would never be true justice. No conviction, no sentence, could bring her back. But it was a moment that marked the end of a painful chapter, a chapter that had begun with a woman's dream of a happy family and had ended in horror. When the judge delivered the sentence, the room fell silent. "Earl Maxwell," the judge said, his voice somber, "you are hereby sentenced to 25 to 50 years in prison, without the possibility of parole." The gavel came down, sealing Earl's fate, but it wasn't enough to ease the pain of Latrice's family. Her children would grow up without their mother, and her loved ones would carry the burden of her loss for the rest of their lives. The community, too, was left to grapple with the aftermath. The quiet horror of what had happened in their midst would linger in the air for years to come. Latrice was gone, but the memory of her kindness, her strength, and her love would live on in the hearts of those who knew her. And though justice had been served, the pain of her murder would never fully fade. In the face of unimaginable tragedy, the Morris Dorsey family's journey was far from over. While Latrice's life had been tragically stolen from them, her children, her loved ones, showed a resilience that would go on to inspire not only their community, but people across the nation. Among them, Justin Dorsey, Latrice's eldest son, emerged as a beacon of strength, determined not to let his mother's death define him, but to use her memory as fuel for a brighter future. For Justin, the loss of his mother was a weight that never fully lifted. The image of holding her as she took her final breaths would haunt him for years to come. But through the pain, he found a reason to push forward, a reason to make his mother proud. She had always been there for him, encouraging him to work hard, to be kind, and to chase his dreams. Now, it was his turn to honor her memory. In the wake of such trauma, Justin could have easily fallen victim to despair. He could have allowed the darkness to swallow him whole. But instead, he chose to rise above it. He focused on his education, determined to excel in every aspect of his life. He put all of his energy into his studies, channeling the grief, the anger, the heartbreak into something constructive. And in a moment of defiance against the odds that had stacked against him, Justin graduated from high school with a remarkable 4.0 GPA. But that wasn't the end of his accomplishments. Far from it. Justin's dedication to his education, his discipline on the football field, and his unwavering will to succeed didn't just stop with academic achievements. He earned a full football scholarship, an extraordinary achievement considering the hurdles he had faced. This scholarship wasn't just a ticket to a better future. It was a testament to the perseverance of a young man who had lost everything but refused to let it break him. To achieve what I really wanted to be a full-out player, and go to school, I had to stop all of that and get right, he said. I had to. If I didn't, I wouldn't have what I do right now. That hard work paid off. Ferris State University offered Justin a scholarship to play football, where he also plans to follow in his mother's footsteps, majoring in physical therapy. I knew at the end of the day I had to work hard for what I want, and that was to go to college on a scholarship, play my favorite sport, and major in what my mom always wanted to, just to get the degree she didn't have. Because I knew I wanted it for myself. We all want to be successful, but first, you have to want it for yourself, and that is what I achieved. Justin said. Justin wants to make his mom proud, achieving what she couldn't because of her untimely death. He just wishes she was here to see it. When Justin was asked about his success, his voice steady but filled with emotion, he would often say, "I do this for my mom. Every day, I think of her. I know she's watching, and I know she's proud of me. I can't bring her back, but I can make sure her legacy lives on." His words were not just a reflection of his strength. They were a promise to the mother who had sacrificed so much for him. In his eyes, there was no greater motivation than making her proud, honoring her life by living his own to its fullest potential. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please reach out to local resources or organizations for help. No one should have to suffer in silence. Your voice can make a difference, and spreading awareness is the first step toward change. To Latrice's children, friends, and loved ones, our deepest condolences. Latrice did not deserve what happened to her. She should still be here, living her life, watching her children grow, and sharing her love with the world. May you continue to heal, and may you find peace in the midst of this unimaginable loss. Thanks for watching, and if you like stories like this, support our channel by subscribing and turning on the notification bell icon so that you'll be notified whenever we release new videos like this.